Welcome to Module 2. This module will explore effective and equitable instructional practices, tools, and strategies to support FSL educators for in-person, hybrid, and virtual settings. Our focus will be on developing learner confidence, engagement, and proficiency in FSL using Cfr Inspired Principles and Practices. We will explore effective and equitable instructional and assessment strategies in order to honor learner voice and lived experiences. There are a few key goals for this module. First, we are ensuring that classroom practices include the principles of the Cefr, the Common European Framework of Reference. The purpose of this is to develop meaningful and relevant tasks that learners can face every day in real-life situations. Second, the goal is for our French classrooms to include practices of UDL, the Universal Design for Learning, to ensure success for all learners. We are aiming to reduce barriers to learning, build student confidence, and develop communication competencies. Next, we are learning to leverage instructional technologies within in-person, hybrid, and virtual learning environments in order to provide differentiated learning opportunities with multiple means of engagement, representation, and expression. We are also focusing on the premise that learning is learner-centered, so that we can honor learner variability and provide engaging and inspiring learning opportunities. Finally, we are developing anti-oppressive, asset-based approaches to assessment and evaluation to ensure that assessment is fair, equitable, and transparent. All learners need to feel empowered to take responsibility for their own learning of the French language. Dr. Christopher Emden shares the idea that the best teachers don't just keep teaching. Instead, they use their pedagogy as protest. They disrupt teaching norms that harm vulnerable students. This implies that teaching is about reaching learners where they really are, based on their previous knowledge and lived experiences. Engaged learners whose voices are heard are better able to learn. This module will explore ways of moving beyond traditional models of learning in FSL classrooms. We are aiming to ensure that the teaching norms we put in place in today's virtual, hybrid, and in-person learning environments are relevant to the communities they serve and empower learners to use the target language in meaningful ways. In essence, in a Cfr-inspired classroom, learners are social agents making real-life connections. Learners have an understanding of the purpose, the why, of what they are learning, and how their learning will help them to navigate the real world. Learners take responsibility for their learning, as learner autonomy and metacognition are of central importance in Cfr-inspired practices. Learning, teaching, and assessment that is based around the principles of the Cfr celebrate learner proficiency, not deficiency, in order to build learner confidence and competency in using the French language. This can be achieved by providing asset-based feedback. Learner proficiency, based on the principles of the Common European Framework of Reference, can be assessed using the Cfr Proficiency Levels. The 6 proficiency levels within the Cfr are A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, and C2, with A1 referring to the beginner learner of the language. The levels focus on a learner's ability to speak, read, write, and understand a language. There are specific indicators to describe each level. For example, an A1 learner is able to understand and use very basic expressions to satisfy concrete needs, introduce themselves, ask others questions about personal details, and interact simply, as long as the other person speaks slowly and clearly. The oral self-assessment wheels from the Barrie Region CEFR project are linked here on the right and can be found on the Ontario Modern Language Teachers Association website at www.omlta.org. These wheels outline the oral communication skills that learners are able to do at the various CEFR proficiency levels. As learners progress on the wheel, they become more proficient at using the language. The philosophy of the CFR is embedded within the FSL curriculum and positions language proficiency according to specific levels. CFR inspired practices involve an action-oriented approach. Action-oriented tasks focus on communicating for real purposes using both verbal and nonverbal cues, as well as sociolinguistic conventions. Authentic, open-ended tasks are created with learner input in a way that inspires and engages them in the learning. The tasks are age, ability, and culturally relevant, and in contexts that learners could face in everyday life in a variety of situations. Learners negotiate their understanding while engaging in meaningful and authentic spontaneous interaction. Learners acquire an understanding that language learning is a lifelong commitment. They are able to see that the skills and knowledge they are learning in the classroom are global skills that can be applied in the real world. Contextualized vocabulary acquisition is required to successfully engage in action-oriented tasks. In other words, the vocabulary, language structures, and grammar components that are being taught and practiced in class have a purpose and are connected to the action-oriented task. As educators, we need to ensure that the learners have the skills, tools, and knowledge they need to successfully complete the action-oriented task. In order for learners to effectively speak and use the French language, the vocabulary and language structures need to be repeated, reused, and reinforced. This can be achieved by using the gradual release of responsibility model. Gradual release of responsibility is the process of scaffolding the learning of the vocabulary and language structures. The educator begins with model practice, then continues with shared practice, where we engage with the learners, then guided practice, which is accompanied with educator feedback, and finally, independent practice, where learners are interacting without educator support. We cannot expect the learners to use the language if they have not had time to practice it gradually. The document, CEFR in Ontario, Transforming Classroom Practice, was funded by the Government of Ontario to determine the impact of CFR inspired practices on educators and learners in the FSL classroom. In a CFR approach, evidence showed that there was a more balanced emphasis on linguistic, pragmatic, and sociolinguistic competences. Language was presented by way of speech acts, with a focus on authentic, everyday uses of French by means of action-oriented tasks. This included an increase in opportunities for learners to practice the language. Evidence also showed that using authentic resources motivated learners to take ownership for their learning, provided tasks and situations that they can relate to, and went hand in hand with the FSL curriculum. In terms of assessment and evaluation, while implementing the principles of the CFR, educators had a way better understanding of the needs of each learner and of making assessment relevant for learners. The website Transforming FSL was created to make professional FSL learning resources, best practices, lesson plans, and tools readily accessible for Ontario educators. A large number of the resources highlight and demonstrate the importance of implementing CEFR inspired practices in the FSL classroom. Learner proficiency, engagement, and autonomy improve when educators use an action-oriented approach. The website reinforces the belief that all students have the ability to succeed in FSL. Choosing action-oriented tasks that are age, ability, and culturally appropriate when planning in a CFR-inspired classroom is key. Learners need to clearly understand the purpose of the task in the real world. The document, Samples of Action-Oriented Tasks, was created in order to assist educators with developing tasks that are suitable and meaningful for their learners and connected to the principles of the CFR. Essentially, when creating action-oriented tasks, the learner needs to be able to articulate, when would I do this in real life? What is the purpose of the task? What will the task accomplish? Just as the learners describe their progress and proficiency in French using the Cfr proficiency levels, educators are able to describe their progression of implementing Cfr Inspired Practices by using the Cfr Continuum of implementation. This chart includes 4 components on a continuum, ranging from full implementation to non-implementation. As educators, we need to ask ourselves how we have truly embedded the principles of the CFR in the FSL classroom. We need to reflect upon the use of authentic communication, focus on proficiency, provision of highly interactive learning, and the importance of metacognition and learner autonomy. At this time, you may wish to pause the video to consider these questions. What are some examples of action-oriented tasks that would be authentic and age and level appropriate to engage your learners? How would you scaffold the learning experience to empower learners to take action?
The Universal Design for Learning framework is an anti-oppressive and culturally responsive framework in that it limits educator bias and allows learners to drive their learning based on their needs, interests, lived experiences, and cultures. UDL is based on decades of research in neuroscience and is considered best practice for teaching all learners in an inclusive environment. By design, UDL reduces barriers to learning and aims to meet learner variability by giving them ownership over the learning process and by empowering all learners to leverage their unique talents, interests, and expertise within the classroom. UDL therefore embodies responsive design and invites educators to consider the identities and lived experiences of all learners. UDL experiences are by design inclusive, responsive, and inquiry-based, often framed through a social justice stance. UDL is essential in the FSL classroom. Learning for All, a guide to effective assessment and instruction for all students, maintains that universal design and differentiated instruction are an effective and interconnected means of meeting the learning or productivity needs of all learners. Educators are encouraged to focus on the why of learning, the what of learning, and the how of learning by providing multiple means of engagement, representation, action, and expression for all learners. Learners differ markedly in the ways in which they can be engaged or motivated to learn, as well as in the ways in which they navigate their respective learning environments. UDL accounts for this variability and empowers each learner to bring their unique needs, skills, talents, interests, and culture to the FSL classroom. In the Ontario New Teacher Handbook for FSL, educators are reminded to present material in a variety of ways, using a variety of multimodal forms, such as by providing learners with several options to make sense of the language through flexible groupings, ways to practice, and different resources. Lessons should therefore have the flexibility and affordances to amplify natural abilities and reduce unnecessary barriers for learning. Learners should be provided with multiple means of engagement in the FSL classroom. We should allow learners to make choices so that they remain invested and engaged in the learning. In practice, this may look like learning maps, exit tickets, self-reflection pieces, inquiries, and/or problem-based learning experiences. Providing multiple means of representation in the FSL classroom means offering multimodal scaffolds to support learners and help show how the learning is transferable to real-life situations. In practice, this may look like guided inquiry groups, choice boards, hyperdocs, individualized programming centers, or inquiry-based learning models. By learning about and leveraging the assistive technologies that are available in your board to support language teaching, you can help showcase the brilliance within all learners. Offering multiple means of expression in the FSL classroom gives learners the flexibility to demonstrate their understanding in flexible ways, which leverage their specific skills and strengths, affording them multiple entry points and opportunities to reflect on their learning. In practice, this may look like flexible assessment practices, single-point rubrics, and/or choice boards. The innovative use of modern technologies and progressive learning models can also play a very important role in addressing inequities and empowering learners as change makers. As has been shared, UDL distributes the power that has traditionally been held by educators to learners by acknowledging their own expert knowledge. UDL invites learners into positions of authority, encouraging them to take ownership over the learning process and learn at their own pace. UDL provides a framework in which learners can cultivate curiosities, build on questions, inquire about concepts of interest, and own the assessment journey. In practice, we must therefore engage in responsive language teaching and embrace flexible roles within the FSL classroom. We need to provide multiple pathways to learning outcomes within language learning classrooms. We need to embed meaningful learning opportunities and action-oriented tasks that replicate real-life language tasks and provide students with agency. Finally, we need to empower language learners to be confident participants and to offer choice with regards to the learning opportunities offered. Some additional resources to support UDL practices in the FSL classroom include the document by CAST, Universal Design for Learning, Theory and Practice, the document Novak Education, What is UDL?, the infographic List of Possible Assessments, the video UDL and Learner Variability, as well as the video Embracing Learner Variability. All of these resources are linked within the viewer's guide. At this time, you may wish to pause the video to consider this question. How do we reduce or remove barriers to language learning through the Universal Design for Learning framework? Reliable and equitable access to technology is more than access to hardware. It is about connecting learners to people, information, and tools. Modern learners use technology to explore new possibilities, form new connections, and participate as global citizens. Empowering learners to explore, try, and use different types of technology to enhance their learning helps to promote higher-level thinking, independent learning, and lifelong learning. Educators use instructional technology to inspire, enhance, and extend their teaching. More importantly, access to both non-digital and digital resources amplifies learners' voices to engage with their world. Instructional technologies are designed to support and assist all learners as they navigate their individual learning needs and goals. Within this standalone resource, OMLTA, A Guide to the Digital Landscape, you will find guidelines and tips to make FSL more accessible to all learners. The resource includes examples of no-tech, low-tech, and high-tech tools which are designed to inspire, enhance, and extend learning in the target language. The instructional technologies within the resource have been organized to provide differentiated learning opportunities with multiple means of engagement, representation, action, and expression. Consideration has been given as to whether or not the tools would best support in-person, hybrid, or virtual learning environments. To explore the document, use the tabs on the right to navigate between instructional technologies, or listen to the audio prompt to guide your decisions. At this time, you may wish to pause the video to consider these questions. How does equitable access to digital resources and technology amplify learners' voices to engage meaningfully in the target language? What resources or digital tools would be effective in empowering learners to engage meaningfully? In the FSL classroom, best practices include the integration of models of learning that are learner-centered and rooted in the experiences of the communities that we, as educators, serve. Effective learning opportunities promote critical, creative, and higher-order thinking skills. Learner-centered classrooms validate learner voices and allow learners to explore meaningful real-world tasks that honor their lived experiences, connect to their passions, needs, interests, aspirations, and cultural backgrounds. It is the role of FSL educators to engage and empower learners while including learner voice and choice in the creation of meaningful learning experiences. Choice boards are one possible model of learning for FSL learners. Choice boards engage and empower learners by providing them with voice and choice in regards to the creation of learning experiences within the classroom. They help FSL learners to engage as active participants, and they invite them to take responsibility for their own acquisition, understanding, and learning of the French language. These choice grids from the Ontario Modern Language Teachers Association are grouped by the strands of reading, writing, speaking, and intercultural awareness. Interaction and collaboration are at the heart of the learning experiences presented within these choice boards. On each of these choice boards, learners are encouraged to select meaningful and multimodal French language activities which align with their interests, talents, and passions. You are invited and encouraged to explore the 4 choice grids offered to support FSL learner-centered classrooms. At this time, you may wish to pause the video to consider this question. How do we integrate models of learning that are learner-centered and facilitate authentic explorations of big ideas and make real-world connections?
Critical consciousness is essential for educators in order to realize their own biases and values and to take action against them in an effort to strive towards equality for all learners. By recognizing and removing implicit and explicit biases, all learners can be given the opportunity to achieve success. Providing equitable assessment means that educators engage in self-assessment in order to reflect upon how assessment and evaluation are delivered in the classroom in order to respond to the needs of all learners. The Growing Success document states that the purpose of assessment is to inform instruction, guide next steps for improvement, and help learners monitor and navigate their progress. Assessment should support all learners in the FSL classroom and be fair, transparent, and equitable, with multiple opportunities for assessment for, as, and of learning. It should be connected to the learning goals of the action-oriented tasks that are derived from curriculum expectations and be related as much as possible to the interests, learning styles, needs, and experiences of all learners. Ongoing and varied assessment needs to be communicated clearly to learners and parents so that learners are able to self-assess their own learning, set specific goals, and plan next steps. A framework for French as a second language in Ontario schools was developed in order to maximize opportunities for all learners to reach their full potential in FSL and have the confidence and ability to use French effectively in their daily lives. By meeting the diverse needs of all learners through the use of the universal design for learning, differentiated instruction, and equitable assessment, educators have the ability to increase learner confidence, proficiency, and achievement in FSL. The document, Learning for All, a guide to effective assessment and instruction for all students, shares the belief that all learners have the ability to succeed. It emphasizes that by putting the learner at the center, our assessment and instruction are tailored to their personalized learning and motivational needs. Assessment for learning informs instructional practices on a daily basis, which is precisely connected to the level of readiness and the learning needs of the individual learner. The purpose of creating learning goals that are derived from the FSL curriculum and connected to the action-oriented task is so that learners have a clear understanding of what they should know and be able to do by the end of a task. Co-created success criteria describe what the success of the skills required to accomplish the task looks like. When specific descriptive feedback of the success criteria is provided during assessment, both the educator and learner are able to monitor the learning. Where possible, success criteria should be connected to all 4 categories of the achievement chart: knowledge and understanding, thinking, communication, and application. Providing multiple and varied ways for learners to demonstrate their learning and make their thinking visible allows for authentic learning experiences that honor learner identity and variability. Use of equitable assessment guides every part of the learner's individual learning process. Triangulation of data in the FSL classroom means that assessment is collected through observations, conversations, and learner products. Observations involve a planned process of taking anecdotal notes. Engaging in conversations means posing questions to learners to make their thinking explicit, such as through discussions, conferences, or follow-up questions. Learner products are produced by learners as a means of demonstrating their learning and can include such items as performance tasks, videos, podcasts, or demonstrations. Using a triangulation of data enhances the validity and accountability of the assessment and assures that the most informed and appropriate decisions are being made on behalf of each learner. Gathering, assessing, and setting learner goals using the 3 types of data works effectively for in-person, hybrid, and virtual settings. Ongoing learner-centered assessment, feedback, and reflection processes improve learner outcomes by limiting systemic biases. Active involvement and engagement of learners in the assessment process connects them with their learning and fosters reflection and a drive to learn more. Descriptive feedback needs to be clear, specific, meaningful, and timely to support improved learning and achievement. At this time, you may wish to pause the video to consider these questions. What does equitable assessment mean to you, and what does it look like in the FSL classroom? How do we ensure that assessment supports all learners and honors learner identity and variability? Your voice and feedback support the development of future professional learning series. Please take a moment to complete the following survey with your team. Should you have any questions about this module, please send an email to omlta@omlta.org. These modules were created under the leadership of the Ontario Modern Languages Teachers Association, OMLTA. The OMLTA is a nonprofit professional association that has been supporting French as a second language and international languages teachers of all programs and grade levels since 1886. Today, it continues to be the leader in professional learning and advocacy, inspiring and connecting Ontario's French and international languages educators. These modules were designed to support FSL educator retention and recruitment by deepening the understanding of the directions, principles, and content of the Ontario curriculum policy documents for all 3 of the province's FSL programs: Core French, Extended French, and French Immersion. The OMLTA would like to thank the Ministry of Education for its financial support in developing this module. Special thanks is also extended to the educators who contributed their expertise and experience in the development of the modules.